All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Afternoon, evening, wherever in the world you are. I'm David Garrison, founder of Climate and Capital Connect, and welcome to Green Portfolio's discussion of whether the finance industry is ready for the great wealth transfer. We're so glad you're here, and thank you for hosting Bonnie and Green Portfolio. We were just talking before we joined, and I think this is going to be a great discussion. These guys are all really good at what they do, and they'll have some interesting insights, and hopefully we can give you a range of perspectives. Some introductions so you have context. I'd encourage you to find out more about the work each of these people is doing and reach out directly if you have questions or want more information. I'll start with Green Portfolio, the hosts. Bonnie Gurry is CEO and co-founder of Green Portfolio. They're the climate fintech engine empowering millennials to make climate-friendly investment choices. With 17 years of climate leadership experience, Bonnie has held the positions of North American Clean Energy Lead at BASF and Renewable Energy Resources and Technology Engineer at New York Power Authority. As a well-respected technologist and leader, Bonnie was awarded her first patent at the age of 17 and recently led market and financial research at PERC. She earned a BS in mechanical engineering from Columbia University, an MS in mechanical engineering from Caltech, and an MBA from the NYU Stern School of Business. Green Portfolio, if you don't already know them, empowers millennials to invest with purpose, and they analyze your portfolio using the proprietary AI-powered engine that scores 20,000 plus stocks, funds, and banks for climate impact. Dr. Kedar Karkare is founder of Karma Wallet. Dr. Karkare started Karma Wallet to help consumers understand which companies are good for the world. He blends biology, data science, and finance expertise to address the effects of consumer choices on corporate responsibility. And his work turning complex data into engaging stories has gained recognition from major publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, and Yahoo Finance. Karma Wallet, if you don't know them already, is a financial platform that leverages cutting-edge technology and impact data to give consumers tools to be sustainable. The company evaluates thousands of companies on their social and environmental impact using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs as most of us know them, as a framework. Through Karma Wallet and the revolutionary Karma Wallet card, a prepaid reloadable debit card launching in spring 2024, consumers can get personalized data around their carbon footprint, insights into their shopping habits, cashback, and automatically donate to nonprofits. Adam Oskorek is founder of Zobeful Climate, a climate tech that makes science-based climate action accessible for companies and individuals. Before becoming climate active about 7 years ago, he founded and worked in startups and scale-ups in a range of technology sectors, including EdTech, FinTech, and SaaS. And I feel like we should just say SaaS tech there just for the alliteration of it. He's worn many hats over the years, building and growing companies, teams, and products. And prior to startup life, he worked for large multinationals in Europe and the US. Solving human-caused climate change is a global challenge and opportunity, and their endeavors to tackle it require them to have, all of us, to have a global outlook from day zero. Zobeful, if you don't know them, creates ready-made, high-quality, science-backed carbon removal portfolios for businesses of all sizes and sectors, in addition to tools and learning resources for accessible climate action. At Zobeful, they think taking science-backed climate action should be accessible, comprehensible, transparent, and trustworthy. After all, it's not tech that will solve climate change and the fossil fuel causes of it. People will. You, me, more people, others, all of us. And together we go further. They have welcomed awesome humans from over 85 countries to one of their climate courses and carbon removal portfolios. Have hope. Make progress. And if you don't know me, I'm David Garrison. I'm CEO of Climate and Capital Connect. Climate and Capital Connect is a professional networking platform for climate sustainability and impact. We diversify your network by setting up one-to-one meetings with other thought leaders and professionals around the world who live and breathe the issues that surface in transforming markets, organizations, and societies. Okay. One quick housekeeping note before we start. This session is scheduled for 60 minutes. We'll spend the first 40 of that-ish in a free-form discussion, and then we'll move into an open Q&A. If you have questions you'd like to ask, You're welcome to post those at any point in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get to them all. And if you'd rather have just these three keep talking, that's fine too. Okay. I'd like to start off by giving people a sense of the lens you're each looking at this through. We'll all have heard different numbers, a range of them, like 84 trillion over the next 20 years. But regardless of the specific numbers, it's big. You're each approaching this from a different angle. And I'd like to start by just asking what you think makes this transition important, aside from the fact that it's huge. So why don't we start with you, Bonnie?
Sure. This is a lot of what we think about at GreenPortfolio is what's so important about this wealth transfer that's happening are the incredibly different priorities and objectives of this next generation, which is inheriting wealth. They are impact focused. They care about how their money is managed. They are eager for new financial products that actually help them to meet those goals, right? They care deeply about climate and are willing to, change how they live their life and what brands they're working with, what companies, what services to meet those goals. So I think we're going to see a very different approach to how money is managed. Additionally, there's not it's much easier for them to switch to newer companies, newer services that are actually meeting that goal. Both technology-wise, it's easier, but then also there's not the same kind of loyalty that there were in older generations. So I think it's a huge opportunity for us to kind of grab these very impact-focused customers and start putting their efforts to good use. So we're really excited about this opportunity. We've been hearing about it for a long time, but we're starting to see the numbers come through. It's already starting to happen. So for us, like this is the right time to start building the products that this cohort really is interested in and have them be climate focused or otherwise impact focused. We think that's so important.
Kedar?
Yeah, so the work we do at Karma Wallet, we're focused on the impact that consumers can create with their spending as opposed to their investments. So I think when we think about the wealth transfer, I'm certainly interested in, like, when you think about a generational wealth transfer, a lot of times you think about where that money is going to be invested. But because of some of the economic factors, for example, inflation, that's creating a situation for a younger generation where they just can't afford a lot of the things their parents could, for example, like buying a house. A decent amount of that wealth transfer is actually going to be used for what we would term sort of like everyday spending. And so there's an opportunity to connect which brands you're supporting. I mean, Bonnie talked a little bit about this, but consumers now inherently, if there's two products that are the same value and the same price, they'll pick the one that aligns with their personal values. And a lot of those values are around sort of social issues and environmental impact. So when I think about the wealth transfer, I'm interested in how much of that is going to be used not for investments, but rather for spending. And how can we use that spending to create change every day?
Interesting. Adam?
Thanks, David. Nice to be here. Good to see everybody. Yeah, so we see it through the lens of how do we actually tackle climate change and the impact that financed emissions have on actually reaching our goal. So the wealth transfer for the next generation that's going to happen, it's really an opportunity to put our money and effort where our values lie and actually contribute really, really proactively to actually solving this, right? To actually tackling it in a meaningful way. Just to give you some like random numbers thrown out there, like between since the Paris Agreement in 2015, and that was the global agreement signed by 196 countries that we were going to stay between 1.5 and 2 degrees. Banking, investments, and other financial services have invested something like $5 trillion in fossil fuel extraction or use, and all the stats and all the data, particularly from our users that trend young or younger, like under 95% of our users are under 45 years old. All of the data shows that we want to do more with our money and be more proactive with our money, but it's actually been really hard to this point. And what we need to do is a better job of understanding the nuance and digging into the small print to know what we're actually investing in, right? So it's returns plus our values, that create the better outcomes and actually contribute to help us solving this generational challenge that we've got over the next 20, 25 years.
So something you guys are touching on there strikes me as interesting, this idea of the balance between competing interests, as we're thinking about where we are, where we're investing and what we're doing with our money. So, on the one hand, talk a little bit, Bonnie, you mentioned loyalty issues, right? This idea that there's less loyalty to a brand and more interest and more loyalty to a goal. And so that kind of brings up this idea of like short-term versus long-term action, or the balance between, Kedar, as you were saying, balance between in real life spending versus investment, the longer term investment. How do you guys think about balancing those tensions between I want to act now and deal with kind of what I spend my dollars on today versus I want to have an impact over the longer term? Like as we're thinking about this wealth transfer, what are the things that we should be balancing?
Yeah, and I know from my perspective, I mean, part of the reason we started this company is because there's a lot of amazing work going on the investment side, and I certainly personally try to invest in assets that have a better environmental and social impact. But it's hard as a human, like we're not built for long-term, like to understand long-term compounding returns, like fundamentally, biologically, if you will. And so to some extent, I think the shorter term incentives and around everyday spending are really important, not necessarily because, I mean, our perspective is that they do have a huge impact, but even beyond that, just to keep consumers and people motivated and excited and feeling like there's a sense of hope and that they're actually making a difference with their everyday dollars. So there's, I mean, if you think about just for most Americans, right? Like probably myself, 95% of people in this country, we spend way more money than we're able to save or invest every year. And so being able to leverage that, it's like something like $17 trillion of consumer spend a year can create change in corporate practices.
But I think we're also going to start seeing, and I hope to see this soon, more of a total wallet point of view from both retail investors, but then also financial institutions when it comes to climate. There are a lot of different ways you can tackle climate with financial products. And a lot of them are new, and it's going to take, users and retail investors, et cetera, some time to learn about all these different kind of opportunities and cool things that are happening out there. But I thought it was interesting. I was just reading this stat from Morgan Stanley. And every year, like the interest in, sustainable investing goes up. And the number one driver this year in their survey for Americans for why they were like interested was new climate science findings, which to me is like kind of a wild idea because like they're not that new. Like we've been at this a while, but it just takes some time for adoption. But I think we're getting to that point where people are realizing that this is happening. To them, it's new. And I think being able to look at the total wallet as an opportunity, whether it's your bank or, new products like, quality carbon removal products or your investment account, looking across like all the different ways that you can tackle climate using financial products. We haven't even started talking about insurance. I would love if we had someone from insurance here as well. There are a lot of different ways we can start to have a more holistic view of a user, no matter where they are on their financial journey.
Yeah. And the answer is both, right? You can take action and contribute in your day-to-day spending as well as your long-term investments. It's not always easy, and I think the nuance and digging in matters. And I think what we're seeing with people like Karma Wallet and GreenPortfolio is you have these new tools that just weren't available to kind of dig into it. Even some of the newer robo advisors give very cursory information around investments and things like that, and their environmental impact, and whether it's the impact that the company is having on the environment or whether it's the risk to the company that the environment has, or climate change has on the company operations and potential future profits, right? There's all these nuances that, that have been difficult for anybody to kind of navigate, that, we're starting, through curiosity and sort of stepping into our agency, that we're able to, take into account both on, when we make a day-to-day purchase, but also when we think longer term, like where we want to put our bets and invest our money long term. But yeah, I think both matter, and I think we need to sort of say that whether it's a big or small contribution that you're making, that we want to it's important that everybody realizes that actually is contributing to the answer, and that's really key, that we all feel that agency and take anything we feel about the situation, whether it's like anxiety or curiosity or maybe fear or just confusion, right? And taking that and doing something with it in a way that works for us. And if that's finances and things like that, or if it's other behavioral or personal choices in your life that you want to take, then they are all good things. And I think it feels like we're sort of waking up to that now, both in North America and in Europe, where I am.
So I want to go back to something though, because I think, those are two interesting but almost separate points. The kind of idea of how we feel like we have to act or want to act. We want our impact to be that almost emotional side and what's driving us, versus the actual impact on corporate actions and on the kind of mechanisms for making change. Maybe talk a little bit, but I want to go back to the emotional piece in a second, because I think that is important to talk about, particularly when you're transferring wealth into another generation. But on the corporate side first, how do you guys see the impact of all of this changing how companies are thinking? Because I think, we've talked for a while about shareholder activism and stuff, but I think you guys are representing a suite of products and services that are, shifting how we think about corporate impact, kind of changing corporate attitudes.
I mean, I think we're starting to really see that. I mean, it's a difficult landscape, right? Because while we're all kind of screaming over here about climate, there are also people screaming on the other side in support of oil, right? And like restricting ESG and trying to, keep, certain progress from occurring. So we are still seeing that happening to some degree in the market. But nonetheless, like it's a fairly known fact that like if you let's say your company is listed with a BlackRock ETF, the sustainability leader of that company is likely meeting with BlackRock, right? All of these kinds of relationships are happening often behind closed doors, but they are listening to their shareholders. They are hearing how they sound on the market, whether they're being included in a fund or not, really does matter to them. So it may feel somewhat indirect, right? How all this like sea change is happening. And sometimes it may not happen as quickly as we would like, but the more we are pushing our advocacy, the more we are able to have access to data, the more we say we care about the data and we're looking at it. All these things do matter. And, I think many of us were disappointed by, the SEC actions on climate disclosures, but nonetheless, we're still, seeing that being pushed forward, whether it's by California or Europe, or, to some degree by the SEC. So it does matter. It is happening. It's a little harder to see sometimes in the investment space. I'd be curious to see how Adam is handling that as well, because yours is so much more direct in some ways, right? But it's a newer product, so that's also a kind of a different challenge.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a kind of a perfect storm that we're seeing, but it's the early part of a perfect storm of pressure on companies. And it's kind of, one, it's the regulatory pressure that's coming down the line, whether that's, something in Europe like CSRD, not to get too geeky about this, but then SB 253 in California as well, around financial disclosures. Sorry, carbon disclosures being treated like financial disclosures as well. A massive change. But companies have also got a lot of pressure from their customers to do more. And there's we often talk about it, about how do we increase the level of, how do we improve people's BS detector around green claims and things like that? How do we do that? And give them the tools that they need to look at something and say, is this credible or not? So you've got that customer pressure, but you've also got internal employee pressure to do more. And we ran a survey last year, and we're going to do it again this year. It's quite a modest respondent rate last year. We're going to try and make it bigger, but we wanted to hear what employees thought, and about how their company was performing in terms of climate obligations and climate targets. And 9 out of 10 said 9 out of 10 said it was the highest priority for them as an individual. Maybe slightly biased by our respondent group, but only 4 out of 10 said their company was doing enough, right? So there's all sorts of talent things here for companies, as well as the investor or regulatory perspective. So it's kind of all these things coming together that are going to put pressure on companies to act, to do more. And the ones that do will be the ones that win and create that advantage over time. And they're the ones that that will benefit from the wealth transfer and from the next generation wanting to put their money and time and effort and spending dollars towards their values, right? And that's going to be a key lever to create change. I won't get on my climate soapbox to it. We can save that one for later, maybe.
But sorry, Kedar, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Bonnie and Adam talked about sort of some of the positive drivers behind corporate changes in corporate practices. And one thing that I think is a challenge, certainly on, I'm not as much of an expert on the investment side, but certainly on the sort of consumer, direct to consumer side, is that the level of trust in corporate claims is decreasing year over year, right? Even though consumers want sustainable, ethical practices. I know for me, for example, I don't trust a single thing I see in an ad if a company's talking about like sustainable practices, because it's just, to me, I mean, consumers are starting to become aware, I think, that that's just a narrative that the company is telling, and there's very little trust that they're actually doing that. And I think that's why it's so important that there are tools and almost like a middle layer between the consumers and the corporates, some of whom are the middle layers represented on this panel, in that it's hard for corporates to communicate what they're doing because of the desire from consumers and from their customers, but decreasing trust. I know for us, we built a data platform where consumers, it's basically the first sort of ESG data platform for consumers about consumer brands. And it rates companies, it shows you a bunch of their values. It's free, and we're seeing increasing inbound from corporates, from companies saying, our score is not maybe reflective of how we feel we're doing. Can we give you data to improve our score? So I think there's an increasing recognition that these technology middlemen, if you will, are going to be an important part moving forward.
So maybe that's sorry, go ahead.
Add to Kedar's point, that we're also seeing companies come to us and say, we thought we were doing good, and then we thought we were doing the right thing, but actually over the last couple of years we've gone further, and we've actually realized that we weren't doing enough, or we can do more, or we're going to have to do more, right? And then the claims that we were making weren't valid. So there's kind of both. There's kind of some that have done it on like sort of deliberately and made it confusing deliberately, and there's others that have kind of done it by accident. And I think we have this real opportunity now that we can help them do that better, right? And I think there is a middle layer. For us, we build, not to be confused, it's not a financial instrument. To be confused with financial portfolios, we build portfolios for carbon removal, so like high permanence removals for mitigating emissions that you can't reduce as an organization or as an individual. And 2 years ago, people didn't understand the value of this, right? But now we've kind of gone through this cycle where actually there's a general consensus that this is the direction that we're going. I think we're kind of on this tipping point in so many different areas. Regulation is a nudge, but the incentives there are that are coming from for the companies, are coming from consumers and also investors as well, right? They're also pushing for it as well.
And we're at this amazing inflection point right now also for, albeit the data is incorrect or inadequate or incomplete, but we're also right at this point of like this whole like AI revolution that's going to bring down the cost of compliance, of reporting, and of everything in this this space significantly. Which I think is really important because it is a very expensive exercise for a company to figure out exactly what their carbon footprint is through their supply chains, all of this, So I think the fact that we're at this point where we can build better, more intelligent models faster, cheaper, and more effectively is going to really start yielding fruit quickly, which is fantastic because we need that. We need a lot of better data sources and data models to allow us to really you can't manage what you can't measure, and that will absolutely help us to tackle that problem.
Yeah,
And maybe
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, David. I'll stop talking in a sec. But like we're also seeing like that. Oh, I totally lost my train of thought there. Sorry, David. You go. You're right.
You'll get it back. Chime in. I love this idea that we're at this kind of not just a changing point for one thing, but that there is a lot of different forces that are shifting quickly here, from the data side, to your point, Bonnie, around AI, all the way through to just, Kedar, to your point, we've been around this long enough that we've seen cycles, right? So that early stage of just saying you're going to do something, that vision setting, has largely kind of turned out to be not so awesome, we're finding out, right? It is hard to back up the claims we want to make. And so I think even on the narrative side, just purely superficial communications narrative, there's a shift from this kind of idea of like distrust, urgency, fear type of narratives. You have to act, go, constraints kind of thing, through to now people are saying, but what could we do? What's the kind of impact we could have, we want to have, just positively? And this transformation, this moment gives us a chance to do that. So I think it's kind of, you're right, it's across, no matter what lens you're looking through, it feels like there's a real shift happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did that spark the idea back?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was just going to say, as in whatever hat you're wearing, right? We're going to be able to, in a few years' time, analyze like carbon disclosures, in the same way that we would financial disclosures, right? That's a new level of transparency that we're going to have in most major markets, I would expect. Being driven by California in the US and the EU. In Europe, so they're just going to be side to side. We're going to be able to look at them, whether you're looking at it from a climate angle, or are these people decarbonizing in line with the science, or an investor standpoint, you're going to be able to hold those things side by side and drill into the data. And yeah, I mean, I think that's really exciting to be able to do that, because in the past, claims or things like that haven't been backed up by them actually having done the work, right?
So let's maybe, I mean, I think it's useful to have you three specifically on this call, because, everybody who's listening right now is probably wondering, like, so what's the thing that, if we're talking about opportunity, if we're talking about transferring this, if we're talking about like where this is going, what's the thing we're not hearing that you guys are seeing in the data? Like, what's the most interesting thing? You guys each touched on data from your own work. What are you seeing that you maybe hadn't expected, or that's a really kind of like behind the scenes insight that people should be thinking about that they're not talking about right now?
I would say, I'm sure people have thought of this, but I think they're not talking about it enough, that across the board, when you, like, as Bonnie said, when you think about the entire wallet, that as humans, right, everybody on this call and everybody listening is unique. We have unique experiences. We care about different things. And people, I think, aren't talking enough about how much personalization is going to be needed for everything across the wallet, from spending to investments. That to Adam's point, when I go on my robo-advisor and click like sustainable, like the one sustainable option that's there,
Right.
Personally, right, I care about social issues just as much as environmental issues. That's not represented. I don't really understand at this point if it's more biased or skewed towards minority-owned companies or companies that pay fair wages, for example. And so the nuances, I think, of corporate practices as transparency increases, to Bonnie's point, as some of the AI tech gets involved here, I think we're going to see sort of the what Spotify did to music. I think that's going to happen to retail spending and investing.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that's a quiet trend that people perhaps aren't realizing is the power that is about to come from how much cheaper direct indexing has gotten, which is basically a tool to allow you to create your, or have an advisor help you potentially to create a really bespoke product, right? So, you know, we saw this happen, you know, ETFs got really cheap all of a sudden, right? We're going to see the same thing happen with the ability to make some really bespoke, cool financial products that meet your values. And so I think that's super exciting that we no longer are going to have to just pick from this like short, you know, list of options anymore. And have a lot more control over how our money is invested at a pretty cheap price potentially.
Adam, what are you seeing?
Less from the financial standpoint, but more from the human standpoint, right? I think the thing that when we're doom scrolling on like Twitter, I'm never going to call it X, by the way, never going to call it X. It's always going to be Twitter. When that the narrative there is it's hard, or we can't do it, or there's too much, there's too much inertia in the status quo. What we see is completely the opposite, right? We see so much hope, so much agency, so much care and attention to be doing more. And that message doesn't always get out. I don't think it plays quite as well as the doomism. But I feel like that hope is something we need to talk more about, because we could be, through our actions, through our advocacy, through our money, we can be the generation that makes this happen, right? And that's an incredibly exciting opportunity, and I think that's the thing we don't talk about enough.
David, I would just add one more thing, which is Bonnie talked about this inflection point. I think even though people are talking about it, I think it's massively undersold how quickly things will change. Just as an interesting aside, if you will, if you look at social media, specifically Instagram and TikTok, by far, other than just like funny videos, by far the most followed, the most engaged topics are sustainability and finance. And so especially when data, themes, trends can be spread so quickly through that medium, I think we're probably underselling how quickly this Venn diagram of impact and finance is going to change.
Isn't it something like 80% of investors? I'm not sure whether it's retail investors or other forms of investors. 80% in both North America and Europe of investors are interested in sustainable investments. And we could spend the rest of the time talking about what sustainable means, right? But 80% is a big number, right? That's the for people making the investment products or the banking products. That should be an alarm bell to say, like, the demand is there, right? Then there's a gap.
And I think what people on this call are doing is like creating the data transparency to make that change, because even though 80% of people want to do this, something like 30% are actually taking action.
Too hard.
It's still a lot though, right? Compared to where we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I do think that like this point that things are actually going pretty well within climate fintech is kind of lost. Like, I don't know, Adam, maybe you can touch on this, how like it's actually really hard to get into a deal for a quality like carbon removal project, like really hard, because they're so oversubscribed, because so many entities and people would like to participate, right? And we don't really hear about that. But that's very very hopeful perhaps, but I also think it's very hopeful that that we're seeing such demand for these products. And we're actually seeing, so the number goes up every year for millennial interest, at least in sustainable investments. And I think it was like Morgan Stanley said it was 98 or 99% last year, said it was like a top priority for them. And the fact that that's not all that's being shown to millennials when they log into their investment account still shocks me. But I think incumbents are being a little slow on that, very slow on this, and have a lot to lose, frankly.
That was generous.
Yeah.
Adam.
I was just going to say, if we took all the money that's been invested in fossil fuels through banks or investment companies and switched that to the energy transition alone, right? Just thinking about moving to non-carbon sources of electricity generation, like that would speed up things like no end. I mean, that's happening. We should all know that that's definitely happening, and it's happening at pace. But switching that money around would make a material difference to how quickly we reached. I'll throw out another term: net zero. There we go. How quickly we reach net zero globally.
So I want to get to something we haven't touched on yet before we get to questions. And that's this idea that I think we tend to approach this as this kind of like monolithic problem of audience, right? This generational transfer of wealth that's never been this big before is going to happen sometime, right? That's a lot of money. It's a lot of movement, but it's also a lot of relationships, right? To your point, Kedar, like we're each individuals, and each one of those individuals is paired with some other individual in that transition, right? So, and the dynamic of those family relationships of whatever it is very real in my mind, and impacts, down to how people talk about what they want someone else to do with the wealth they're giving them, right? Never mind what someone is willing to take the wealth to do, right? So my question for you guys is, if we split apart those two actors instead of treating them as the transition, right? What's the advice you would give to each of the two players as they enter into this age where they're actually going to be moving the money?
I mean, I think I would say, and I think this is happening anyways, that if you are on the receiving end of this money, that you are being given a gift at a very important point in our world history, where you can put it to use doing something good that also will give ample return, right? And I think it's important to note how, you can be a part of the solution for real. This is a really pivotal moment we're at. And I think that message, though, is coming across when they survey people who are inheriting wealth. Around 87% they say they don't want to stay with their current financial advisor, or the financial advisor who is currently managing this money, which I think is also a point to be told to the older generations, is that we have been paying attention, and we don't like how things have been going. We do feel like to some degree we have to get on top of this mess to try to fix it sooner than later. And that opportunity is there, and we are looking for the tools to manage it. So that's really the message I would say to both financial institutions and these two generations is who are part of this.
I don't know that I have any advice for sort of the people receiving the wealth, but certainly for the ones giving it. To Bonnie's point, probably an understanding, to her point around like switching financial providers, from the older generation, probably an understanding that younger folks are generally a little promiscuous, if you will, about their financial companies, right? Like people have credit cards, debit cards, buy now, pay later. They have budgeting apps that are now saving money. Like something like 1 in 3 Gen Z will open some sort of new financial account every year. So while, to your point, David, it might be a good idea to say, here's how you should invest your money, here's where you should do it, the likelihood is that they're going to diversify not only across asset classes, but also across technology platforms.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think it's important to make the point that like the detail matters, and so it's not, these things aren't, looking into the nuance and what you're digging into the information and cluing yourself up on that can be really powerful, and help you make better decisions and also invest more wisely. And we've never had more data or more ability to do that than now. But don't take things for granted, right? Don't take this sticker on this thing looks like it is good. Like dig in a little bit and see if you're still comfortable with it.
I think it's interesting how often the word or the concept of trust has come up in this discussion today. because I do think that that is a major problem in the financial services industry that they are not ready for, is that their customers do not really trust them, especially when it comes to environmental impact. And I think that is one of the most important things to keep in mind during this transitory period.
Interesting. All right, why don't we open it up for questions? So if people on the call have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A. We'll field them as you put them in, and hopefully we can get through them all. While we're waiting for people to type them out, maybe let's go to that point about the financial services industry, because you guys have, obviously you guys are doing work to push fintech, right? And the boundaries and how we're thinking about the possibility here. But we've also said nobody trusts the existing financial industry, or maybe that's not entirely fair. They don't trust it for this because of all the issues that we've talked about. What do you think, that does create a gap, but people's money is in the existing financial industry largely right now. So while we want to make these tools available for everybody to transition into, most people have not yet. So while they're in these existing financial vehicles, what are the things you guys think those vehicles in the financial services industry needs to do to change? Like, how can it help this?
Well, I mean, they could do it. They could do it if they wanted to, right? I hate to be the guy that says it. I think and transparency, to Bonnie's point, trust and transparency are the keys, right? Sorry to jump in there a little bit, Kedar. I think when the last data I saw on it might be out of date, a little bit out of date by a year or so, but something like, of ESG funds or like ethical green funds that are out there a year or two ago, like only 10% didn't have some connection to fossil fuels. Like, is that black and white? Basically, they could shift those dollars potentially.
I'm going to go on a wide tangent here and just say that they should send all their executives to therapy, because I think fundamentally fundamentally companies are made up of humans, right? And younger consumers are looking for, we've talked about trust and transparency. And it's hard, like if you think about just sharing your emotions with someone, it's hard to be vulnerable, right? That carries over to a company. It's hard to be, there's this ingrained, embedded belief that as a company you should be private and secret. And consumers are now saying, okay, I'm spending my money or I'm investing in, it's just going into the void, right? Like what is actually happening? So that's all to say that I think just like a human reflection of how important it is to be transparent can help.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting to see which of like the big banks is going to kind of be the first mover in this space. Like, having been a bit on the other side, talking to all these institutions for quite some time, they have been hiring some super smart climate people for real. They have climate teams that are doing good work internally, but there's this real hesitation, especially from a political standpoint, right? And many of these larger institutions are extremely political because they have government entities that buy their products, right? There's a big concern that if, they come out being the pro-climate bank, the really environmentally friendly bank that, goes through their entire portfolio and does, the right thing. And they do know what the right thing to do is because they have these people who are advising them internally, that they'll see such a huge backlash politically, especially in certain states where they want to keep that money in their portfolio. So, trying to find that first player who's willing to really step into, I think would make a huge difference. And I think they would be well rewarded for their efforts, honestly. There are a lot of people who would take very kindly to a leader in this space. And that hasn't quite happened yet. I think it could. And I think going back to kind of Adam's point, internally, and this idea that corporations are made up of humans, there are a lot of people internally at these institutions who are pushing for innovation and change. It is just very hard because it's a risk, right? And they don't know how to quantify that risk of their employees and of their customers being climate forward.
It's hard to turn an oil tanker on a dime.
Right. But to your point, I think there are little kind of golden glows happening around us, little fairy lights in the industry. Where do you guys see those? Like, are there any places where you really do see momentum building at the larger ones? I mean, I think I appreciate that you guys are building this and as the place to put the money, right? Or to how to shift things. But but right now, the place they're coming from, it also needs to change. So
Yeah.
where are you seeing, where are you seeing those thought leaders or people who are, who we can trust in the space?
I don't know about like a human thought leader, but I think from a corporate side, and Adam, you may be aware of this, in Europe especially, there are companies, again, on the spending side, because that's where we focus. There are companies that are built to simply estimate the environmental impact of transactions. And whether it's typically carbon, but they're doing water estimates, they're doing waste estimates. And we're starting to see in Europe, I'd say probably, 20 or so banks have integrated these estimates where on the transaction level in your banking app, you can see the estimated carbon footprint of your purchase. And Visa has done a partnership to integrate that into their network. MasterCard has a whole initiative around this. So we're seeing it not only and a couple of banks in the US are starting to do it too. So our perspective is that sort of carbon footprinting is something that a lot of consumers have heard about, are aware about, but that's just the beginning. And there's so much more data that can be added onto that to see through your purchases.
Joshua has a question here, and I'm gonna shift it slightly. Where are you guys? So there are these large pools of people who want to make the change, right? Consumers internal to the companies. Are there places? I think we talk about ourselves as kind of, again, Kedar, to your point, like individuals making these individual choices. But as people, we tend to gravitate towards each other. I mean, there's a reason we're having this talk right now with four of us, right? We don't want to just make the decision on our own. So where do you guys see pools of people happening for moral support, for collective action, for, some of it is platform based. So where are you guys seeing people gravitating towards as you're watching the market?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, some of the most interesting places we've seen growth in like climate communities has been within certain employment sectors. So there's like, creatives for climate, right? It's a pretty large community of people who just work in the creative sector and, have made a commitment to steer their career to supporting companies that are good for the climate. Similarly for lawyers, we've seen this kind of starting to happen in group by group. But the other thing that I think is interesting, and this is probably happening everywhere, not just in our world, is just such a fracturing of these conversations into smaller and smaller rooms. So I do think that's something for us, whether it's a WhatsApp group or a closed Slack community. And I do think that makes it a little bit more difficult to get your message out there, because there's not just, as much as Adam's still on Twitter, I guess most people aren't anymore. A lot of people have left Twitter. Most people, so it's harder, I think, for us to have this collective action, just because we're at this very strange point in our media landscape where there is no one source of kind of community or truth that we all are going to anymore.
But to that point, there are more, so I've been active in, working in climate for about 4 years. And 4 years ago, there was no online spaces, right? Really, for people to talk about this or people to congregate around these sorts of values or these sorts of things. And since then, we've had like sort of a real shift in climate technology, climate tech, whatever you ever talk about it. And over the last 4 years, I think the running tally, the last time I saw it was something like $70 billion has been invested in climate tech in that time. And it's spurned, obviously lots of people to go work in climate and get excited about actually contributing to that shift. But there's also so many online spaces or communities you can get involved in, but I wouldn't say there's like one. I'd say everyone has its own little niche that you should try and figure it out. figure out what's right for you. Some are more broad, but start Googling, right? And I think you'll run into people and you'll find things. Maybe you'll find Zopeful as well on your Googling journey.
Definitely.
But so I think it's a bit like thinking about the investment piece we talked about earlier. It's about you having taken that agency and running with it a little bit yourself and finding out where are your people, because they're out there. I guarantee they're out there, and it's easier to find them now than it has been.
I would add that I think we're getting to the point where, when you think about just industries and technology broadly, and this relates to the conversation about where are these conversations happening. Bonnie said there's a fracturing. A lot of times things fracture, but then they come back together. And I think there's an opportunity, maybe this is sort of the seed of it, and I'm sure there's other conversations going on, to create a space that's dedicated to sort of sustainable financial technology, to get stakeholders from banks and credit unions, technology companies, regulators, all sort of at one conference, if you will, or in one space, because it's getting to the point where the smaller and smaller rooms are not conducive to probably the adoption that we'd all like to see.
How there's another question here from Heather asking how you guys are seeing the financial return versus the impact tensions shift in this wealth transfer.
There's interesting data that was like in the last time, so Stanford does some really good surveying in this space. And the last couple of years ago when they surveyed millennial and Gen Z, they were willing to lose, I think it was like 5 to 10% of returns in order to align their investments with climate, which is really significant. At that time, baby boomers said they were not willing to lose anything. So that has changed, and that's certainly, I think, reflective of the current financial situation. Now, the last survey, which just came out for 2023, I believe the numbers were, Gen Z and millennials were willing to lose 1 to 3% of returns. At the same time, I'm not giving financial advice, but there's actually pretty good data out there showing that investing with climate in mind actually can be a pretty good investment. Depending how you do it, depending, what your thesis is, et cetera. If you get a good financial advisor or other information, you actually can have a very robust, diversified portfolio while still investing with climate and environment in mind. But I do think that that's part of this generational shift as well, as people are saying it's not only profits, right? We have to have somewhere safe and nice to live as well. So I do think that's a really important question, and it still is something that people are very concerned about when they think about this topic.
Bonnie, I would say that I completely agree with that, and I've seen the same data. And I would add that there's probably an opportunity, hopefully somebody out there is working on this, to actually tie and create value for the impact that's created out of spending and investments. We have a patent on something similar, but when you think about sort of the foundational infrastructure that's been built by cryptocurrency, and I know there's a lot of hesitation around that space right now, but there's an opportunity to not only track your financial return, but track the return of the impact of that money, and then create a financial vehicle for that.
Yeah, that's one space I still think we haven't seen the full impact of blockchain on climate, and it is starting to roll out at the kind of larger entities, but I think it still absolutely has a lot of potential. And this is not like endorsing a cryptocurrency. It's about using the underlying technology in order to actually track impact and returns, exactly like you said.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is working its way slowly into conversations, and to your point, There's an organization called the Investment Integration Project, run by a couple people. Bill Burkhardt is the co-CEO there, and they're looking at the sovereign wealth funds and the Japan pension funds and stuff like that are thinking about how to create these portfolios that recognize the impact of the investment, not just the return of it. But these large funds haven't really spent much time doing that before. They haven't thought about the social or the larger impact across their portfolio, not just the returns. So I think you're right, but it just takes time to work its way down.
And I agree with you, David. It's early, right? We're early, but these are mega trends. These are things, the biggest trends for the next 20, 30 years really are climate, decarbonization, and coupled with AI, right? In the same way that tech has kind of taken all the growth over the last 10 years. These are the trends that are going to have returns in the future. So.
Go ahead, Kedar.
Yeah, David, there's a question in here about sort of like the role that media companies play in addition to financial companies. And I just wanted to say that personally, I just deleted all my social media a few years ago because it wasn't good for me. And a lot of my peers are doing that. And I think what's an interesting trend in the media space is that historically there's been this perspective that like fear-based media is the best way to create retention and loyalty to a media brand, if you will. And there's a shift among younger consumers towards, I would say, basically like hope is more powerful actually than fear.
Yep.
And a good example of this is a media company called The Cool Down, which they're all about sort of like positive climate news to inspire people. And they've seen some pretty good traction. So just wanted to point that out.
That's great.
Yeah,
and I would be.
That's what we're trying to do. I think the positive narrative beats the negative one over time. Yeah, we're tired of that, right? I think we're tired of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would be a terrible founder here if I didn't plug Climate and Capital Media, which is our sister venture. And the whole premise behind Climate and Capital as a media company was that it was an optimistic view of where there was potential and how, as people who want to transform organizations, markets, societies, we actually think about what the arguments are, where the issues are, with kind of not rose-colored glasses, but a kind of realistic, hopeful, optimistic view of where potential sits and where return is. So, so check out Climate and Capital Media. So just to end, we've got a couple minutes left here. Any final thoughts from you guys, having had this conversation, on what you'd like to tell people to do tomorrow?
Yeah, I think I would ask people to, one, think about their own total wallet. Where could they be starting to dig into for impact? Because I think you have a lot of personal impact, but then what other places in your world do you have impact in terms of how money is being invested and spent, and in with which providers, and whether that's at your company, your church, your endowment at your university, all of these places you have a voice and some impact. And I think it's important to note that as well, especially if it's your pension fund or something like that, even especially your money. So keep that in mind as well.
I would say along those lines, I completely agree. There's basically two ways that we can, as individuals, primarily create the biggest impact. One is the jobs we work, and the other is where we put our money. There's a great book by a really interesting author named Morgan Housel called The Psychology of Money. And I think that, I mean, I would suggest reading that, like if you're going to do anything tomorrow. And the reason is because I think we have been conditioned to think of money as like a resource that we should gather and protect and hold, but fundamentally money is a tool to create change, right? We can think about it as a tool to create change in society and the environment, but even if we think more personally, it creates change in your own life, right? You can have a better home, you can have a car to drive, you can send your kids to school. So just reframing the way you think about money, and that's a great book to start with.
That's a good idea.
I mean, I can barely, improve on both of those. They were great. I think the main thing for me is, taking it down to your soul, that what you do matters, and like your values matter, and what you choose to do, whether it's with your money or the things you choose to buy, or like how you choose to do things. Like they are parts of contributing to this similar to a generational wealth transfer, like a generational change in how we see the world and our relationship with it, and we can be part of that each and every single day. Everything adds up. Nothing is too small. Basically, we can all contribute.
Well, that's great thoughts to end on, you guys. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, I'd encourage you to reach out to Bonnie, Adam, and Kedar directly to find out more about the work they're doing and to sign up for Karma Wallet, GreenPortfolio, and Zopeful, and Climate and Capital Connect. Thanks for each of you being here, and thanks to GreenPortfolio for hosting this session. Until next time.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, everyone. That was great.
Thanks.